After Eden, the earth no longer obeyed man as it once did, and heaven seemed more distant with each passing day. Adam tilled the soil with his face bowed, as one who carries not only the guilt of a mistake on his back, but the weight of an entire generation. Eve, between pain and hope, brought into the world the first son of the fallen race. She named him Cain, saying,
"I have acquired a man with the help of the Lord."
Eve believed that perhaps through him, the promise of redemption would begin. Then Abel was born, quieter, lighter, closer to God. Cain was a farmer, shaped by hard ground and the strength of his arms. Abel tended the flocks, walked among life, waited with faith. At the appointed time, each brought to the Lord the fruit of his labor. Abel gave with faith the best he had, and his offering rose. Cain also brought what he had, but his offering found no favor, and the silence of God became a thorn embedded in his soul. While Abel continued in peace, Cain began to look with hardness, first at God, then at his brother, and what was frustration turned into bitterness, and bitterness into resolve. They were in the field, as many times before, but that morning there would be no harvest. For the first time, the soil received the blood of a man, and what was created to bring life began to record death. This is not merely a story about two brothers. It is the origin of the conflict that still lives within each of us, because the blood of Abel still cries out, and the voice of the Lord echoed once more, not to punish, but to confront.
Cain, where is your brother?
Eden was closed, and the silence of God weighed heavier than the flaming sword that guarded the entrance. The earth, which once blossomed at the sound of the Creator's voice, now demanded effort, sweat, and pain to respond to the man who was formed from dust. Adam didn't speak of what he had lost. He carried the memory in his eyes and buried the guilt in the hands that worked the soil. Each strike of the hoe was a plea for forgiveness. Each meager harvest was a reminder that the world was no longer as it should be. Eve walked among stones, tended the fire and the seeds, but carried another hope in her womb. An ancient hope, a promise given on the day of the fall, that from her offspring would come one who would crush the serpent's head. And when her first son was born, she didn't see him merely as a baby. She saw him as a sign, an answer, a beginning. And she said,
"This is the first, brought forth in the land of pain, born of the promise. God gave him to me, and that's why I called him Cain."
Cain grew up among stones, dust and toil. He learned early to dig, to plant, to harvest. The earth did not obey him, but he ruled over it. His hands were strong, his face stern, his eyes always watchful. When he spoke, it was with little. When he was silent, it was with much. Later, Abel was born. He was not like his brother. His steps were light, his gaze calm. He liked to walk with the animals, not for strength, but for companionship. While Cain knew the earth through struggle, Abel knew the flock through care. One was stained with mud, the other with wool. One ruled the field, the other served life. They grew up under the same roof, ate the same bread, learned the same stories, but the paths each one chose would lead them in opposite directions, even without them realizing it. Time passed, the work increased, and with it, the call of conscience as well. The moment came when both had to present an offering to the Lord. There was no temple, no priest, no written law, only the heart and the altar. Adam called them with a grave voice, like one who knew what it meant to offer before a God who sees all. And he said,
Remember that it is not the fruit of the labor he seeks, but the spirit in which you give it. He does not look first at the altar, he looks at the one who raises it.
So Cain set aside part of the harvest. He placed ripe fruits in baskets, but not the first ones. It was what was left over. It was good enough. He didn't worry about order or form. He thought more about what he had already done than about how he was doing it. He looked at what he had and murmured, more to himself than to God,
God already has everything. He doesn't need my best. I'll bring whatever.
Abel, on the other hand, chose carefully. He walked among the lambs and picked the youngest, the cleanest, the most fragile. He carried it in his arms like someone holding what does not belong to him. He touched the altar like someone entering a sacred place. And before offering it, he looked up and said,
He gave me everything. That's why I give him the best I have.
Then both knelt. The fire rose, and heaven responded. Abel's smoke rose straight upward. The altar burned steadily, and his soul was filled with peace. But over Cain's offering, nothing happened. The fire burned slowly. The smell was bitter. And heaven did not move. Cain's face darkened. His eyes lost focus. His chest tightened, not from remorse, but from wounded pride. Abel said nothing. He looked at his brother with respect, but not with pity. And that silent gaze was more disturbing than any word. The next morning, Cain was no longer the same. His steps were heavier. His eyes avoided his father's. His face could not hide the disappointment. He couldn't bear God's silence, but even less Abel's peace. It was in that state that God spoke to him, not with condemnation, but with confrontation. The voice came like wind, but its weight was eternal.
Why are you angry, Cain? And why has your face fallen? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it.
Cain didn't answer, not with words, not with tears. His face remained closed, his heart even more so. The next day he called Abel to the field. He simply said he wanted to talk. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't show rage, he just called. And Abel went, because he still believed that a brother could be reconciled. Because he still believed that it was enough to listen, enough to understand. And maybe because of that, he went. They walked among the plants, between stones and lines of earth. The same earth that sustained life was about to be marked by something it had never seen. Abel walked calmly. Cain watched him in silence. Then he stopped, turned, looked into his brother's eyes. And what had been hidden inside him, resentment, envy, rejection, would now become action. An action that would change everything. The field looked the same, but the story would never be. For the first time, a man would rise up against another, and the first blood of humanity was about to be shed, not by the hands of an enemy, but by the hands of a brother. The field had no name, but that afternoon it would become the most well-known of all. The ground that once produced wheat, roots, and fruit was now about to taste something it had never known. It wasn't war, it wasn't famine, it wasn't an accident. It was the choice of a man. And the man was Cain. He walked with his body leaning forward, but his heart lagging behind. His feet knew the path, but his spirit no longer distinguished between shadow and light. Abel came behind, without fear, without haste, without suspicion. He still believed his brother just wanted to talk. He still believed that a wound could be treated with time and listening. He saw no threat in the silence. He saw no death in his brother's eyes. The two of them walked among tall grasses, among stones worn down by the sun. The sky was clear, the wind was soft, everything around seemed at peace. But inside Cain, Something was about to overflow. It wasn't explosive rage. It was accumulated bitterness. It was the muffled sound of a rejection he had never been able to accept. It was the frustration of a son who felt invisible, even before God. Abel stopped for a moment and broke the silence with a simple yet sincere question.
Cain, why did you bring me here?
Cain didn't answer. He took a deep breath, looked around as if searching for a reason outside himself. But the reason was within. It had been there since the altar, since the day he saw heaven receive one and ignore the other. Since the moment he realized it wasn't just the offering that had been rejected, it was him. Abel took another step, came closer, still with hope in his voice.
If there's something between us, speak. I'm not your enemy. I'm your brother.
It was in that instant, without warning or signal, that the gesture came. Cain looked around, found a loose stone on the ground. It wasn't large, but it was enough. He gripped it firmly, like someone who had already decided, like someone who would not turn back. And then, with a sharp and direct motion, he struck his brother's skull. The first blow didn't bring him down. Abel staggered, trying to understand what was happening. But the second blow came fast. The third was the last. There was no struggle. There was no scream. Only the sound of stone against flesh and of life slipping away in silence. Abel fell to his side, his face still turned toward his brother. Blood flowed from his head, staining the ground. And then, silence. But it was a different kind of silence. The wind stopped. The leaves stood still. The entire field seemed to hold its breath. And the earth trembled, not on the surface, but from within, because for the first time it had received the blood of a man, a pure blood, an innocent blood. Cain remained there, breathless. He didn't run. He didn't scream. He simply looked at his brother's body and then at his own hands. Something had happened, something that could not be undone. But he still tried to believe it could be forgotten. He tried to believe that God's silence was also God's forgetfulness. But then, God spoke.
Cain, where is your brother?
The voice did not come with thunder, nor with wrath. It came with weight. It came with truth. It came as one who already knows the answer, but still offers the chance for confession. Cain looked away. He still tried to flee. He tried to hide what was visible. And he answered coldly,
I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?
But God did not ask to know. He asked to expose. And now there was no more hiding place because the earth had spoken, the blood had cried out, and the Creator had heard.
What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are cursed from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its strength to you. You will be a fugitive, a wanderer, without direction, without a place.
Cain fell to his knees, but not in repentance. It was despair. It was fear of what would come, not because of the guilt for what he had done, but because of the pain of all he would lose, because of the certainty that he would never walk the same ground with the same peace, that he would never look to the sky without hearing the echo of spilled blood.
My punishment is too great. I can't bear it. Today, you drive me from the land and from your presence. I will be a fugitive, and whoever finds me will kill me.
But God, even before the first murderer, did not answer with death. He answered with a limit. He answered with a mark, not to protect, but to remind, not to spare from consequence, but to prevent vengeance from opening more wounds.
Whoever kills you will be avenged sevenfold, and I will place a sign upon you, so that no one touches you.
And so, The first man to kill was also the first to be marked, not as a hero, not as cursed, but as a witness. Because every step Cain took upon the earth now carried the weight of what he had done and the memory of what had been rejected. He looked at his brother's body one last time, and then he turned his back. The field remained, the blood remained, the pain remained, but he left. He would walk through lands that would not recognize him. He would build houses that would not last. He would try to forget what heaven would not silence. But wherever he went, the mark on his flesh and the cry of the earth would follow him, because the innocent blood still spoke. Cain walked aimlessly, but it wasn't his body that wandered. It was his soul. The ground that once obeyed him now refused to cooperate. The soil resisted his touch. Seeds died before they could sprout. Wherever he dug, he found stones. Wherever he rested, the earth stole his sleep. He was no longer just a man in fear. He was a man who knew he would never find rest. He tried to rebuild, tried to plant in other lands, to pitch tents, to form bonds. But even among men, his presence brought silence. The mark on his back could not be read in words, but was understood in fear. No one drove him out, but no one embraced him. No hand punished him, but no home received him. At night, sleep came with visions. He saw Abel's face still on the ground, blood slowly running. Sometimes he saw the altar. Sometimes he heard the voice that asked, "Where is your brother?" And even in silence, the answer still weighed. He couldn't forget, but he couldn't cry either. Cain carried the mark, but what crushed him wasn't the visible sign. It was what he felt inside. He wasn't a fugitive merely by decree. He was a fugitive within. Where there had once been solid ground, now there was instability. Where there had been a sky that responded, now there was a ceiling of stone. The mark did not burn him, but it followed him. In every village he tried to visit, there were eyes filled with suspicion. No one knew his name, but everyone felt that something surrounded him. Children hid, women whispered, men watched from a distance, and Cain remained silent. He didn't explain, he didn't justify, he just walked. He already understood that there was no longer an altar where he could offer. There was no longer a garden to desire. There were no longer brothers. And deep inside, he knew that all that remained was the sound of his own footsteps, pursued by the memory of blood. One night, he sat by a fire. The flames burned, but brought no warmth. He watched the wood slowly being consumed. He thought about the seeds he planted that never grew. He thought about the words God spoke to him, still echoing. But above all, he thought about the brother he could no longer see. Abel's name was never spoken, but it was in everything. It was in the memory of the flock. It was in the shape of the altar. It was in the silence of the mornings. It was in the space that would never be filled. And in that dying fire, Cain understood that the greatest punishment was not rejection. It was absence.
I didn't want this, but I did it. And now, what's left of me?
He tried to build a city, a place to erase the memory. He stacked stones, raised walls, marked foundations. But every base trembled. Every structure seemed to carry invisible cracks. The walls went up and fell again. Days passed and faces changed. But he remained the same. A man who tried to be accepted by heaven, was ignored, responded with blood, and now belonged nowhere on earth. He could hide from men, but not from his own heart. He could cover his ears, but would still hear the cry rising from the ground.
If I cannot die, why am I still alive?
Some said he was cursed, others protected, but no one dared come close enough to find out. And so he wandered, year after year, carrying a memory that time would not erase. On every hill he climbed, the sky remained silent. In every well he dug, the water did not come. In every attempt, there was an answer of emptiness. He was not just a wanderer. He was a living reminder that consequences exist, that one does not kill the righteous and remain the same. The world moved on, families were born, tribes were formed. But Cain kept walking. And as he walked through lands that bore no fruit and faces that bore no names, the blood of Abel kept speaking, not in voice but in justice, not in words but in weight. For the earth, once marked, is never the same again. Time passed, but the burden did not. The mark on his body no longer drew as much attention from men, but inside him, the sign burned with the same weight as before. He walked among cities that did not know him, among generations that no longer remembered what had happened in the field. But the earth remembered. It still carried the blood, still heard the cry, still remembered the one who made the ground weep for the first time. And wherever Cain went, everything seemed to wither. The crops would die, the fields would dry up, the rains would stop. It was as if the earth refused to prosper beneath his feet. Even when trying to stay, Cain was expelled by time. There was no place where he could put down roots. He built, but the walls crumbled. He tried to rest, but sleep would not find him. With every child born in his tents, he watched the cycle continue, but without peace. His hands still had strength. His mind still knew how to plan. But no achievement seemed to last. And when he looked around, everything seemed dark, as if the sky had never been blue again since that day. He did not speak of the past, but all his days spoke for him. Even as a wanderer, Cain married. He had children, and he tried to begin again. When his first son was born, he named him Enoch, and in an attempt to leave a mark that was not a curse, he built a city and named it after the boy. But no city can erase blood. No name can replace the silence of God. The city grew, sons multiplied, grandchildren were born, and among them, one called Lamech, the first man to kill after the first blood. Lamech did not just kill, he boasted of it, and said to his own,
I have killed a man for wounding me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times.
The descendants of Cain remained alive, but not free. The shadow of what had been done lingered in every gesture, in every story, in every city built upon soil that still remembered the cry. The mark had not faded. It had merely been passed on. And the end of Cain? The Bible does not say how he died, but ancient traditions tell that, already old and weary, he was struck by a stone, by mistake, from one of his own descendants. A death without honor, a lonely end. As one who does not die at the hands of an enemy, but by the repetition of his own story. Cain lived. He lived long, but he did not live light. He was not forgotten nor forgiven. He remained as a reminder, as a sign, as a witness. His name crossed centuries. His pain spread, and his silence became a warning. The earth was never the same after it drank the blood of Abel. And man, neither was he. The name of Cain did not disappear. It was not carved in stone, but in history. Because the blood he shed did not dry, it spread. It spread over the earth, into the conscience, into the memory of time. And no matter how much he tried to flee, to forget, to rebuild, there is no city that can erase a cry, and no distance that can silence what heaven has heard. This is not just an ancient story. It's not only about 2 brothers in a field, nor merely about a crime. It's about what happens when man tries to live without God, when the ego speaks louder than the conscience, when the silence of heaven is mistaken for permission. Cain was not born violent. He was born from a promise. But he traded the promise for comparison. He traded the altar for envy. He traded the presence for rejection. And when he felt forgotten by God, he acted as if God wasn't watching. But he was, and he still is. Because the story of Cain is not an isolated chapter of humanity. It is a mirror, a reflection that returns every time rage overcomes love. Every time someone believes they have the right to take, destroy, silence. Every time the earth feels the weight of innocent blood. What happened there didn't stay there. Abel's blood didn't stop on the ground. It rose, and its voice still echoes. Not as a cry for revenge, but as a reminder that heaven does not remain silent, and that there will come a day when every debt will be settled. Maybe you've felt what Cain felt, the rejection, the silence, the weight of not being accepted. Maybe you've walked away, carried wounds that grew too large. Maybe you've even hurt those who only try to love you. But there is still time. There is still a voice. There is still an altar. And the blood that speaks louder than Abel's is Christ's. Because the one who cries out for justice can also cry out for mercy. And if this story spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, spread it, pass it on, because there are still many who need to understand that God sees, God weighs, God responds. Finally, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like this video, because this was just one of the stories, and we still have many more to tell. May God bless you.